chiropractic isn't just about what you adjust. Again, it's about the results that matter, right? But it's about what we say before, after we adjust, how we have that proactive communication, because parents are in it for the long run. They just don't need a doctorate. They've had that. They've been to practitioners all around the block. They need a guide. And when you communicate proactively, predictively, and powerfully with that authority, you become the guide that they're praying for.
All right, chiropractors and chiropractic students, welcome to the Family Practice Podcast. You know, the one you've been waiting way too long for, because this podcast will actually stay focused on chiropractic. Not only what it takes to get world-class clinical results for kids and families in your community, but also what it takes to build a legendary, incredible family practice that takes care of your family way beyond your dreams. I'm Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be joined by Dr. Matt Hill, Dr. Ellie Wright, Jackie Jakubowicz, and incredible guests, chiros, associates, CAs, all these folks making massive impact around the world. We're going to cover everything: pediatric, perinatal, family practice. This is the podcast you've been waiting for, because moms and dads and families have always needed us. Now they're finally ready for us. I hope you're ready for the Family Practice Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Family Practice Podcast. Right now, more and more chiropractors are shifting to a neurologically focused care model. I could not be more excited about that. There are more and more coming to our team, but many then struggle with how to explain the complexity of neurodevelopment in a way that builds certainty, trust, commitment, and to be honest, is understandable. So this is why we want to talk about predictive and proactive communication being the missing link between clinical certainty and patient results. It's not just about being a good communicator or a good talker. It's about stepping fully into your role as a guide for families, walking them through the storm of developmental and neurological challenges, and helping them get to the other side of that. It's all about the results, right? So in this podcast, we want to talk about predictive communication, how that builds trust and retention throughout your care plan. We want to talk about how to simplify complex neuro concepts with powerful metaphors, analogies, things to be that guide for that parent without overwhelming them and fire hydring them with communication. And then how proactive communication shifts from a passive listener to actually a confident leader and taking authority. We'll also give you some actionable strategies that build authority right from day one. Now, before we dig into the principles behind predictive and proactive communication, I want to take you back to a powerful moment for me at PWC where I practiced that really changed everything for me for this predictive standpoint. More than a few years ago, it would have been probably 6-7 years ago. Mom brought a 4-year-old son in, really struggling, nonverbal, severe sensory overwhelm, actually would barely even come into the office, would not go into an adjusting room at all, would hang out in the playroom, hang out in our community area. Very much melting down, totally disconnected. The type of kid where like you try to hold him and that's not happening, right? Now mom had been to pediatricians, neurologists, speech therapists, the works, and no one had to explain to her what was happening or really what to expect. She was looking at it from that outside in approach of like, my child can't go to any practitioner. He can't see a dentist, get his hair cut, can't go sit through a PT, an OT, a speech therapy session at all. So sat in our office, just completely exhausted and emotional, and said, we just want someone who can tell us what's going on and what's next, because we don't even have confidence that anyone can take care of my son. Well, we walked through the perfect storm, neurodevelopmental delays, and then really the sequence of what healing looked like in these phases. And I remember just seeing her face throughout that conversation, the tears started to shift to a little more hope and a little more hope. And, confident you can maybe help us. And for the first time, she started to have this language and vision for her son's healing that came through the nervous system. And then what was so cool is she stayed committed, even through the tough regressions, even through the detoxes throughout his care. And so then we fast forward to almost a year later, and her son's then sleeping through the night, digesting really well, emotionally connected more with his parents. He would let us adjust him, go into adjusting rooms, and he's on track. And then she starts to see him start to form words almost a year in. And she's like, this is exactly what you said would happen. We saw these little things happen first and build into these bigger developmental things like speech, like social, all those things. And she was then able to navigate this healing journey confidently because we were able to communicate it as clearly as we could and help her stay through that messy middle of those healing phases where some things are good, some things aren't, but really focus on those softer signs. So I want to break this down exactly how you can become that guide for your patients using this predictive and proactive communication in your own practice today. I think you're going to absolutely love this training because it really gets into some of the things we struggle with as chiropractors of, am I ever being too predictable? Am I calling my shot too much? Can I say that? Well, here's what I want to start this conversation off with to you. And this is really to assure you as a doctor, calling your shot or being predictive, it isn't a guarantee. It's using clinical science and experience to be predictive with the sequence and phases of neurological healing. So we're not guaranteeing that something will happen, but we also have the experience to be predictive and be proactive with telling them, communicating them the sequence and phases of that neurological healing, of what's going to happen. So we have to be, as a clinician, as a teacher, as a doctor, we have to be somewhat predictive, or we're just not telling them what we see as the care going forward with that. We're not telling them what we see within the care plan. So don't be afraid to call your shot. It's not a guarantee. They will not hold you to that as a guarantee. It's talking about this is what we expect to see first. And if we don't see that, well, then we need to change things up. This is why we dig in clinically, right? To primaries, to care plan, to techniques we use, all of those different things, because we know from experience how this should progress. And that's really what being predictive is. So I want to go through this in really four main steps, four main teaching points. And the first of which I'm going to call the pre-work for you today with predictive and proactive communication. The first thing you have to do, even going into this, is have a good foundation. You have to have a confident understanding of neurodevelopment yourself. You have to understand the nervous system. This is why within PX, we focus so much on those 10Ds, on the 10D model, to really dig in to what the science is telling us, what is happening with the adjustment. We have to study the science of subluxation, chiropractic neurology, and then know it, right? Understand it at an absolute 100 out of 10 level. And I'm not being hyperbolic on this. We have to master that. The better you know it, the easier you can explain it. Then we have to master the art of care planning, communications, the conversion side of it, because we have to get them to that point, right? Then, as I said, there's really three phases of this. We have to know how to find the primary, find the major subluxation, know what technique we need to use, and know the care plan that we need to give. So what this means is we have to train ourselves. We have to be obsessed with neurodevelopment. We have to obsessed with chiropractic. We have to be obsessed with the most important thing, with results. That's our job from here forward. And that's really the entry point. And to quote one of my amazing friends within chiropractic, Dr. Jason Day, I remember him saying me, and I don't want to butcher this quote, Dr. Jason, but I remember you saying, when a patient comes into you, they expect you to deliver a world-class adjustment, right? That's the starting point. It's not like we're going to do an okay adjustment. We need to be world-class chiropractors from the beginning in every single phase and obsessed with what we do, because that's the foundation we bring. And the better we understand it, the better we'll be able to communicate it proactively. So know that first. That's so important. So, and know this, and I say this encouraging, if you're still in school, if you're still learning all this, if you're first few years in practice, you don't have to be there. You don't have to feel like, oh my gosh, I've got this all figured out. I've been in practice almost 10 years now. I don't feel like I've got it all figured out. I'm constantly learning, but be that consistent learner and be obsessed with it, and you will continue to get better. Number one, in this predictive and proactive communication. Once you've got that foundation there and you're absolutely obsessed with it, you understand neurology, you understand it better than anybody else, because you do. The first thing we need to do is establish authority from the start. Now, this might be not maybe what you were thinking. I know we've talked a lot in this podcast or in different trainings about how, we want to listen to parents, we want to learn, we want to take a history. But honestly, when you have that experience, they deserve to know that. They deserve to see that. And so we have to start early, even in our day one consult, of building that trust and confidence through education, through our empowerment, by teaching the science of subluxation, neurology, and chiropractic in simple and relatable manners. This is the analogies and metaphors. I always go back to, when you're first starting in practice, we have this gas pedal, brake pedal analogy, right? The parasympathetics and the sympathetics could not be simpler, right? You would not believe how remarkable or eye-opening that is for parents. Look in their eyes when you explain that. That might, right now, being the years in that I've been to communicating, that is the most boring thing for me to communicate. And I have to catch myself sometimes because that's the first time those parents are hearing that, and they need to hear it again and again and again. So if I'm bored with it, that's a good thing because that means I've been explaining it for years over years over years, and they still need to hear it because they're hearing it for the first time. And so use those simple analogies that really then you can expand off of to go deeper into the neurology of it so that they understand the big picture, that the nervous system is the key to the root cause, that subluxation is a big deal, starting with the birth, the perinatal experience to onward into birth, into development, that perfect storm with it. Now, using analogies and metaphors helps, right? That gets them, I say that's part of building that bridge of getting there. But really the secret sauce of bridge building is insight, scans, and technology. We haven't talked about it. We could not talk about these enough, I guess you could say, on this podcast. But insight scans, they look into exactly what we're trying to communicate and care for, the nervous system. So when you have those scans in front of you, it's a very easy way to build a bridge in that day one and day two to say, hey, day one, here's what we're looking for. I'm talking about your history right now because I want to look at that history along with these objective findings and scans that look at the root cause. And then I want to carry these into day two because that's going to help me know exactly how to care for your child. Science plus technology is just the language of today. Gone are the years of the growth charts and the percentages and that being the end all be all. Heck, the genetics conversation, right? Like how many parents do you see that you saw 7-8 years ago that came and be like, well, it's a genetic thing, so we know that's the way it's going to be. Nowadays you get that and they're like, well, it's a genetic thing, so we need as much help as we can, right? They know that it is all about the language, the science, the technology of today. And that is where we are at the forefront of. So you can build authority off of that. With you building that bridge, those scans, the fact that they can see it, the history, the fact that you know what you're looking for, those are all building authority within your day one, your day two, even that first phone call. If you go back to how your CA answers the phone, that is so key to being predictive with communication because you're already telling them really what is pieced together, what is put together, and what they're going to see, not only with their care, but then with their healing journey to be predictive and proactive with it. Now, authority matters so much because we're all about the healing and the results of kiddos. I want you to hear that. There's nothing more important than getting results. So I want to talk about this from kind of an overall practice level, but I want you to be obsessed with results over anything. Now, if we have a lack of authority, it can really be seen, felt, and heard first in your branding and marketing message. And that's oftentimes where the first part of the relationship begins, right? You're looking for new patients. If you don't have authority in neurologically focused pediatric chiropractic, they're probably not clicking on your Instagram page. They're probably not looking up your office number, texting you, calling you, and reaching out, right? So you have to have authority there. Authority will again immediately show up in your communication, and it'll actually decrease your conversions because when parents are signing up for a care plan that looks at changing neurology, those care plans aren't just, 12, 24 visit, 2-3 month care plans. They are 5, 6, 7, 8 month, year-long care plans that start at a high frequency. You have to have authority. So you have to have that pre-work, have that good foundation, establish authority, and build that up to have that conversion take place. The other thing is, without authority, you're just not going to care plan quite enough. You might know in your head, you're like, you know what, like this is a tough case. This is going to take me a little bit. But how many of us had that thought in our minds that we're like, you know what, I'll maybe give them 2 to 3 months. We'll go 90 days. And by then they'll be all in. Then I'll convert them to wellness and it'll be all good. Wrong. If we do that, we might not get the results we need. And remember what I started this conversation out with, results are the most important thing in being predictive and proactive. They're so important that if we are predicting what's going to happen and we get to that 90-day point and it's not there, well, what are parents thinking? We lose trust. They lose that trust in us. And so authority shows up big time. And it can also show up big time in your analysis and your adjusting. So throughout the clinical scope of practice for us docs, it is so important to nail number one here, establish authority from the start. That allows us to be predictive. That allows us, when parents are going through a tough time, to really lean on that and be like, you know what? Dr. Matt has the answers. Dr. Tony has the answers. Dr. Jason has the answers. And I'm going to ask them first because they're going to keep me on track, because they're looking at the nervous system and they're looking at the root cause. And this is the transition here to number 2, because I love that connection to the root cause. Because number 2 is help parents connect the clinical dots at the same time you are. I'm going to say this again. We're helping parents connect the clinical dots at the same time you are. Now, I'm probably preaching to the choir here on this. So if you hear us talking about connecting the dots, you're like, oh yeah, of course we're connecting the dots. That's just what we do, right? Notice I said at the same time that you are. With peds and perfect storm work, especially, it's important to be able to trust your eyes and ears, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're doing, everything in there, and sometimes even more than that, and then communicating that right to parents as you see it. This is table talk, and this is massive in your communication and in assurance. So when you're looking, when you're listening, when you're going through everything, not only from a report CSI level on a day 1 and a day 2, but also when you're table side, or even before when they're walking in the room, you are looking at everything and you're communicating about their movement patterns. You're communicating about their emotions. You're asking them questions about what's going on and how their day was and how they're presenting. We want to see all of these things because that gives us a great idea of where their nervous system is at, and it helps us connect the dots for that parent, both globally and then in a small granular sense right there that day. So when you're looking for clinical results and tracking, you might have the scan in front of you, you might have that history in front of you, but then what you're trying to do when they sit on that table right before they get adjusted is say, here's what I'm seeing that matches that scan. Here's what I'm seeing that matches that history. Now let's get to work on it. So if you're looking at this and you're seeing a kiddo table side, and you see the shoulders really raised, you see them walk to the table where they're really tight, their breaths are short, they're not taking that big deep breath that we all need to take, right? That just shows relaxation. If they're really wound up, if their eyes are kind of shifty, those are all things we're noting. We're not only noting them, but we're talking to mom. We're like, you know what? Like, it makes sense that we saw a 350, a 400 on their EMG for their total energy index, because today I can absolutely see that. They do not want to get on the table, so that matches. So let's have this adjustment and let's do something about it. So then when you're looking and you're listening, for everything that they're telling you, for everything that you're seeing, as you're adjusting them, you're actually explaining that. You're saying, hey, here's why we're doing this adjustment. We're adjusting this T12 because, it's right by the diaphragm and right by the adrenals. And we're going to open this up. And I actually want to look at the pre-respiration pattern that he has before we do this adjustment. And then I want to look at the post-respiration pattern that he has after this adjustment. And if that respiration pattern is improved and it's deeper and it's better, that is a massive win in the moment for those big changes, for those scan changes, for that total energy, for the big symptom improvements we're looking for that we can go out and go forward to. So much of this connecting the dots happens so granularly in the moment. Make sure you're communicating them in the moment and not leaving them all in your own head and being like, you know what, that's good. I'm seeing good things. Talk about them. You want to take these and you want to look at kiddos where you can say when they leave that adjusting room, they're more calm, they're more connected, they're more relaxed, they're moving more smoothly and confidently. Head rotation or tilt might be gone, shoulders are relaxing. All of these big physical signs, they're taking deeper breaths. All of those physical neuro signs are so key from an output standpoint, which means the neurocommunication internally is so much better. So point those things out. That is going to score you points in being predictive about what's to come, because then you can rely on that communication to take all of the little snapshots that you have and be predictive of what's going to happen next. Number 3. To be predictive and proactive, we want to take the most complicated topic and communicate it in the most relatable way. So taking the most complicated topic and communicating it the most relatable way. Now, you guys know when you've been listening to this podcast, this is not the podcast that likes to use big scientific words, right? Like we don't use a whole lot of salutogenesis. You're going to hear me talk about neuroplasticity, but if I talk about that with a parent, I'm clearly going to define what neuroplasticity is. A lot of times I'll say nerves that fire together, wire together. That's how the brain works. It creates these patterns and it improves because it learns to do new things. So we like to really undercomplicate it, simplify it to communicate it in the most relatable way. That does not mean dumb it down. That means we just have to do a better job of explaining it so it makes sense. I remember being in chiropractic school myself. I was actually a dad and a patient first before I went to chiropractic school. I remember sitting in CNS class in Try 1 at Palmer in that Hall of Philosophers. Amazing environment. And I remember listening the first lecture from Dr. Torgrud, amazing lecture, assigned us a massive quiz after the lecture that I was like, holy cow, this is going to be a lot of work to do. But I remember probably 25% of that not being able to understand even what they were talking about with neurodevelopment because I was just so new to it. I wasn't pre-med. I wasn't prepared for this. And it was a massive learning curve. Now, thankfully, I was in chiropractic school. So when you're in chiropractic school, you're like, okay, I'm here. I got to get on board, right? Your parents that come to you in practice are not in chiropractic school. You may send some of them to chiropractic school, but you will not send all of them to chiropractic school. So just make sure that you simplify the conversation and take these complicated CNS tracts, dorsal horns, amygdala communication and communicate it in the most relatable way possible. And this is why I love analogies and metaphors. One of my favorite ones, and I'll share a couple of this, is building or restoring a house. Just like building a house, you need a solid foundation before adding walls and a roof, and skipping any part of that, leads the shoddy foundation can lead to instability. Oftentimes in care, I use this analogy for the initial phase of care where you go in, you have a kid that maybe has a high total energy. They're like the kiddo I used the example of at the beginning of this episode that is very dysregulated, sensory motor struggles, emotional output is very overwhelming. And in a way, the building and restoring analogy is you have to bring in chip gains first. You have to do the demo, right? You have to tear it all down. You have to release everything. And a lot of times in this phase, you might see a little bit of a detox. You might see, them struggle because you're making their nervous system a little uncomfortable because you're changing these patterns. They are maladaptive patterns that have been there for a long time, but you're still putting chaos into a system that has maladapted into comfort. And so you're creating this change, and that's going to create a detox. And what do demos look like? They look messy. If you walk in the middle of a demo, it's going to look crazy. There's junk everywhere. They haven't cleaned it up yet. But after that demo is done, it opens up the space. It allows you to see, okay, What are the finishing touches I need? How do I build this back up? How do I reorganize this? And that's what's so important within our care. And that was so key to the patient I mentioned, because there's this messy middle in care, right? A lot of times at the beginning, you see a whole lot of progress. You see a lot of that teardown. You see a lot of that detox. And then you see some amazing things. You see sleep, you see poop, you see them eating more, you see them reacting more, and, being a little more social, and these emotional things come on. And then you get to this middle phase where they maybe have to catch up in development, whether it be the motor system, the sensory system, the cognitive system, all of these things. And that takes a little bit of time. And the body, the nervous system, actually chooses what it does first. So you're not necessarily in control, right? And so it might be that, hey, parents' number one goal is we want to get our kid talking. We want speech to come along. But you know what? Their sensory system is a hot mess express. That sensory system needs to heal first before they can activate those motor speech pathways that are so deep oftentimes. So that's why it's important to use those analogies and metaphors and talk them through the phases of care. Another analogy I love is the learning to read analogy. When you teach a child to read, you start with learning the letters and sounds, then you move to words, sentences, and eventually books. Skipping any step leads to confusion. I love this analogy because this is me. I think I skip steps in school, so I'm not as good at grammar. You can ask anyone when I write how much editing people have to do for me, but skipping those steps lead to confusion. So you have to have a good base. This is why as chiropractors, we start with the nervous system. We start with the root cause. We start, when we look granularly at these scans, with the areas that are the most chronic, exhausted subluxation patterns, and we get them better first, for lack of a better word, and we build about that. And so then we've built a foundation up before we provide the reorganization, before we start to lay those new decorations, right? For that analogy before, you don't want to put aesthetics ahead of the neurostructure. And that's why we go back in time with the developmental timeline. And we always say, look at those softer signs, right? Eat, sleep, poop, motor function. All of these things are so key to build up first. And it's as easy as that to communicate it. Don't be scared of massively simplifying this. When you see sleep, celebrate it. When you see the kid having a major digestive storm happening and there's poop everywhere, celebrate it. That's awesome. When they're eating more, they're eating mom out of house of home, celebrate it. Those are the simple things that are happening that we don't need to overcomplicate it. That is the start of neurohealing, and you've got to communicate those. Here's where I'll leave you guys with after those three big keys. If you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. That's actually a quote by maybe the smartest man ever, Albert Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. And that's always been a lesson that I've taken to heart. When I go through, a day one, a day two, a table talk, and I'm like, man, I'm struggling a little bit with my own words. I maybe, went through that and didn't feel as confident as I could. That's really where I'm going back and saying, you know what? Maybe I need to understand this better so I can communicate it better. So that all goes back to that pre-work of day one of making sure we are just so good and we know neurology so well because we understand it. We can communicate it. Chiropractors, I hope this message, this episode gave you a little more clarity about what communication is and how we can be proactive and be predictive and call our own shot and feel confident in it without feeling like it's always like a guarantee or salesy or anything like that. I hope this gave you clarity and really made you think a lot about the conversion, the communication process with it. If it did, I'd love if you let me know about it and we continue this conversation because we want more chiros ready to lead with certainty as they're shifting into neurologically focused PX practices. So know this, chiropractic isn't just about what you adjust. Again, it's about the results that matter, right? But it's about what we say before, after we adjust, how we have that proactive communication, because parents are in it for the long run. They just don't need a doctor. They've had that. They've been to practitioners all around the block. They need a guide. And when you communicate proactively, predictively, and powerfully with that authority, you become the guide that they're praying for. I hope you all get to that point, because many of you are, where you are that guide and you lean into that. If you are just a student and you are in the process of becoming that guide, you will get there. Lean into that, because parents are looking for you for the hope, help, and answers. So I hope this episode found you well. Get out there and do some hope dealing.
Hey, Dr. Tony here, and I wanted to say thank you for listening to the Family Practice Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a thing. Also, if you're looking for more content from us, you can absolutely subscribe to our newsletter, watch exclusive episodes on YouTube, and dive deep into the articles and blogs on our website. All of this is linked in today's show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.